All right, so I'm former Dutchess County Legislator Joel Tyner, and here tonight with Michael Shuman, uh, innovative new economy, pro-local small business expert, professor for Bard College, for the business program, the Green Business Program, MBA. You've seen Michael Shuman quoted in the New York Times and Washington Post, and been on national media for many years and decades. He's the author of God knows how many books. I'm doing a horrible job at this introduction, but his website is michaelhshuman.com. michaelhshuman.com. In 2008, he co-authored with Ann Davis of the Marist College Bureau of Economic Research and Melissa Everett of Sustainable Hudson Valley, the Northern Dutchess Alliance Blueprint for Economic Development Report, which unfortunately, too bad the leaders of Dutchess County did not follow up on enough. And we also have another superstar here, Neil Seldman. And of course, the two of them have worked together on Montgomery County. If there's one county in the country that apparently is doing things right, it's Montgomery County, Maryland. Of course, I met Neil in 2009 in Albany, one of the first, if not the first, zero waste conference in Albany. And my mind was blown. And then I forget where exactly I was introduced to Michael Shuman's work, but and of course, my mom has been blowing my mind for years. Doreen Tignanelli is too modest. She doesn't particularly care for turning her camera on. But as I said before we started recording, is Doreen Tignanelli and her husband, Jim Beretta, who for years and years and years now have been attending the monthly meetings of the Dutchess County Industrial Development Agency and the Dutchess County Local Development Corporation, 4 years, Doreen says. And
I think they deserve a prize.
Yeah, indefatigably documenting how bad the corporate welfare is. And so, and that's Sequoia here in the background. She's creating a zoo, our 4-year-old. I just wanted to, before Michael talks about all the innovative, wonderful things that Dutchess County could and should be doing, I just wanted to briefly go into some of the how bad it is in Dutchess County. So, for instance, people don't know, 5 years ago, Dutchess County Controller Robin Lois did a blistering audit of the Dutchess County Industrial Development Agency and the County Local Development Corporation, revealing that Cricket Valley, which is a frack gas power plant that I basically helped launch a movement in Dutchess County to fight the construction of, they got a $101 million tax break in 2017. They're getting similar tax breaks until 2050, over $1 billion. Over $1 billion in corporate welfare. And of course, the people who run Dutchess County, the Republican county executive and the Republican-controlled county legislature appoint the members of the Dutchess County IDA and the LDC. Don't believe me, it's all in Robin Lois's audit of the Dutchess County Industrial Development Agency and the Dutchess County Local Development Corporation. Here's another one, the Gap, Amazon, Frito-Lay. They are not little local mom and pop operations. As Michael Shuman is going to go into depth, there's no reason why they should be getting millions and millions and millions of dollars in tax breaks. Just a month and a half ago, the Dutchess County Industrial Development Agency approved $151 million in tax exemptions for the phase 2 of the Bellafield project in Hyde Park. 151, well, it's going to create 154 jobs. Doreen knows how to do math. She made sure that I was aware and other people on her email list were aware. That's $1 million a job. I can't wait to hear what Michael Shuman is going to tell us about this. $1 million per job, a per job subsidy with a 20-year pilot, otherwise known as a payment in lieu of taxes. That's not all, folks. As Diane Jablonski 8 years ago, who was a former county controller, she did a piece in the Poughkeepsie Journal a while ago talking about the massive Nuvance HealthQuest expansion of Vassar Brothers Medical Center. Well, Nuvance got $99 million in tax-exempt bonds from the Dutchess County Local Development Corporation 4 years ago. Massive expansion. Now, they laid off 14 nurses at the Vassar Brothers Medical Center, as Hank Gross of MidHudsonNews.com reported. There was a big rally. New York State Nurses Association, Jonathan Jacobson, New York Assembly member, was there. But also in March, Nuvance, the same company that got $99 million tax-exempt bonds from the Dutchess County Local Development Corporation, they laid off 102 workers and they closed the Thompson House in Rhinebeck, the Thompson House nursing home. Okay, that's not all. That's not all. Here's the last one, and then Michael, you're going to go, I promise. Doreen sent this out regarding permanent job numbers. Materials for the Dutchess County Industrial Development Agency in March, the March meeting, show a failure to meet IDA job creation and retention numbers for the 3 IDA projects that closed last year: Arthur May redevelopment, 1 Dutchess Phase 3, built Parcel 3 for the Dutchess County Industrial Development Agency. Less than a third of the target for new jobs was met. Only 40% of the target for job retention was met. And also, Comptroller Tom DiNapoli for the state has issued, and Fiscal Policy Institute, Good Jobs First, Greg Leroy. There's other people that are really experts on the corporate welfare. I'm sure Doreen, hopefully before the evening is through, will be sharing with us other stuff. But and Neil Selman's work also sort of fits into this dovetailing. Instead of the monopoly control of the waste management industry, it should be local, decentralized. But tonight is mostly about Michael Shuman. So, Michael, take it away. I did not do a good job introducing you. If you want to talk about, name some of the books that you've written, and I'll shut up now. I've said enough.
Just give me screen sharing, and that.
Oh yes, I
that
will.
would be-
I will.
Then we're
I will
off
do
to the
that.
races.
All right. Screen sharing. Hold on a second. Here we go. I'm going to make you the host. There you go.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. So nice to be with you this evening, and I sense most of what I want to share with you, you either know or are experts in yourselves. So maybe this is really just going to give you some additional ammunition. But Joel has I would say one of Joel's strengths and weaknesses is that he's incapable of focusing on a single issue. And so his flyer fused together a bunch of themes that cross a bunch of books and initiatives that I've done. And he really wanted me to, in addition to sharing some of my thoughts about the subsidy programs, to talk about local investment and what's sort of new and interesting in the local investment realm. So I'm going to just jump through all of these things and try to do it in about 25 minutes, and then we have lots of time for discussion. So a starting place for me in this analysis is Ann Markison. Ann Markison is a emeritus professor of public policy at the University of Minnesota. And she wrote, I think, the definitive book on economic development that is rooted in corporate attraction or retention. And as Joel explained, the attract and retain paradigm is really all about paying bribes to companies, but almost all of them are non-local companies. It is paying bribes to global companies. And she says in this book, and this is a book, by the way, that has about 25 people inside of it. And I'm going to pause for a second and just ask that everyone mute themselves, because there's background noise. And Joel, maybe you can mute people as well. But she has she had about 24 people write pieces for this book. Some were supportive of corporate attraction, some were critics. And in her summary piece, she writes, incentive competition is on the rise. It is costly, generally inefficient, and often ineffective for winning regions. Now, clearly, it's ineffective for losing regions. That is, if you put, hundreds of thousands of dollars into chasing companies and you have nothing to show for it, then this is absolutely a waste of money. But what I would change in her quote here is the word often, because I would argue that it is always ineffective, even for winning regions. And the reason has to do with cost effectiveness. Amazon, as you know, did a very visible corporate attraction a couple of years ago, and there were something like 600 jurisdictions that ponied up bids. Many of these bids were in the neighborhood of what Joel was talking about at, I don't know, $1 million per job. And what is absolutely irrational about $1 million per job is that honestly, it would be more cost effective to just take that $1 million, put it in a low risk bond and pay a family of 4 a living wage in perpetuity, and you'd never have to worry about the intermediary of the corporation. It is a completely economically irrational position. But it's worse than that, because we know that this does the opposite of economic development. It actually promotes things that hurt the economy. Now, there is a wonderful nonprofit in New York that's gotten started maybe about 4 years ago called Reinvent Albany. And I eat up all of their newsletters when it comes every week. Yeah, Neil.
Please excuse me. I wanted to give you the thumbs up because it's a great, I follow them closely and it's a great organization. I pushed my hand when I meant to give you a thumbs up because it's a wonderful group. I suggest everyone subscribe to their newsletters.
Yeah, and it's a free newsletter. And one issue that they had about, I think it was probably about a year ago, where they summarized 20 studies that show why subsidies fail. And it's a really fabulous integration of academic research on this. But it won't surprise anyone on this call to know that what the research reveals is that there is always the overpromising of jobs and under delivery once the deal goes through. It's an unfair playing field in that the intermediaries, the representatives who try to put the deals together, are in the end representing the corporations, not the communities. It leads to an enormous amount of lobbying and honestly bribery, and this is why this entire practice often has to be practiced in secret, because when the details become public, it is highly embarrassing. But it's a destruction of democracy when we do this. We also know that when companies are attracted like this, most of the jobs, and when I say most, I mean probably close to 90% of the jobs are imported. That is, new people move into the community to take the jobs. It's not solving an existing jobs problem. We know also that most of these deals are ineffectual. Why are they ineffectual? Because the corporation was probably going to do the deal anyway, and they just did the bidding to lower the costs along the way. We know that this generates high levels of inequality. And the reason is that we have lots of data that when communities go through booms and busts rather than gradual growth, the booms and busts tend to lower family income. And that's going to generate more inequality. And the last point about this, which to me is at the heart of what we're talking about tonight, is that when you focus public money on larger businesses, you are making smaller businesses less competitive by definition. So you are undermining you're undermining the development, the evolution, the growth of the businesses we absolutely want to develop for the kind of economic development we're looking for. But there's one more reason that I will mention as well, and that is that when you look at what the cost of local economic development is. And there's a bunch of studies that have been done around the country on this. The typical cost of creating a job through just pretty vanilla flavored introducing of companies to local banks, helping them with business plans, running incubators. The typical cost of doing this is about $500 to $1,000 per job. So we're talking about a cost that is 1/1000th the cost of what most jurisdictions in New York, and honestly most jurisdictions in the country, are still practicing for economic development. The alternative, of course, is focusing on local business. And the reason why all of us, I think, are very enthusiastic about local business is we know that local businesses spend more of their money locally. So this is a study that was done in British Columbia in 2013, showing how money moves through the British Columbian economy when people spend $1 at a restaurant or retailer in British Columbia. And on the left, you see how the money moves through with independently owned, locally owned restaurants and retailers. And about half the money stays in the province with that first level of expenditure. Whereas with the chains, it's about 17 cents on the dollar. So roughly speaking, every time a British Columbian resident mindfully spends $1 at a local restaurant or retailer, the province enjoys about 2.5 times the job effects and 2.5 times the income and wealth effects and 2.5 times the tax collections and so forth. And we know that this is true across the United States. So this is a study that was done in the Harvard Business Review in the summer of 2010. It is a regression analysis of communities across the United States. And what it shows is that in those communities with the highest density of locally owned business, there is the highest per capita job growth rate. And we also know from the Federal Reserve of Atlanta, another study done in 2013, that when you look at counties across the United States, in those counties with the highest density of locally owned business, there is the highest per capita income growth rate. So in other words, if you want to bring down inequality, if you want to raise social justice, doing so with local businesses, it's a pretty good strategy. Now, if we had more time together, and we can talk about these if anyone wants to, I would make 3 assertions about locally owned business. And these assertions are not just true in the United States, but they're true probably in every developed country in the world. The first is that most jobs are in locally owned business. In the United States, it's 60 to 80%, depending on how you define local. Second point is that we know, for some of the reasons that I just laid out for you, but others that we can talk about, that locally owned businesses are critical for economic development. And the last point, which I think is not as well appreciated, is that if you take out startups, which startups have a high failure rate, we know that existing locally owned businesses actually have pretty darn good profit rates. So it's hard to find these data, but the most recent study I have found on this is 2009 from Stats Canada, showing that the highest profit rates are in companies, Canadian companies with 10 to 20 employees. And the lowest profit rates are those with over 500 employees traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Now, you would figure, given these kinds of facts, that most businesses are local, they're really important for economic development, they're highly profitable. All of us would be putting our money into these businesses. And I would just say, about 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk at a big conference in Bristol, United Kingdom. And there were maybe 500 people there. It was a conference called Planet Local. And I asked the people in the audience, I said, okay, by show of hands, how many of you do your banking at a local bank or credit union? And about 5% of the audience raised their hands. And then I said, okay, those of you who have any form of savings for your retirement or for your kids' education or for medical emergencies, how many of you have at least 1% of those monies in locally owned business? And again, it was like a couple of hands went up. And what I pointed out to them is, if the so-called localistas of a Planet Local conference are systematically over-investing in Fortune 500 companies and under-investing, and frankly, most of them not investing at all in local business, it's clear what the nature of the problem is. And what I, tried to impress upon them is that there's a lot of things that communities can and are doing to try to change this. And this is one way, I think, a very powerful way of promoting economic development. So this is when, this is a picture here of President Obama signing the Jobs Act, which legalized investment crowdfunding. I believe this was 2012. And I was in the Rose Garden. It was my first and only time in the Rose Garden. So I took this picture with my iPhone. And it really was a pretty momentous occasion, because up to this point, if any local business wanted to get a penny of investment from a grassroots investor, and by grassroots investor, I mean you're not in the top 5% of income and wealth. But if you want to get a penny from a grassroots investor, you would have to do legal work that could easily cost you $15,000, $25,000, $35,000. And of course, it was silly. No one wanted to do that level of legal work for small levels of investment. And what the Jobs Act did is it said, okay, we're going to reorganize this and make it possible for small businesses to come to federally regulated websites, which they call portals. And each business can raise up to $1 million per year. And each investor in the US, independent of income, can put in up to $2,200 per year. Now, since then, the ceiling of what a local business can raise has been raised from $1 million to $5 million. So here's what's happened. It took 4 years for the regulations of investment crowdfunding to be put into effect. But between 2016 and the present, basically 1.5 million Americans have put in $2 billion into 7,000 companies. The average company has raised about $400,000 in investment capital. The average investor, grassroots investor, has put in $1,000. Significantly, the most successful businesses have been those run by women or people of color, because they were the ones who were historically excluded from capital markets. So it's been a pretty good success. And it's at this point that I want to take a step back and just point out that when I'm talking about local investment, I am not just talking about putting money into businesses. Local investment can be investing in yourself by paying off credit cards, or investing in your kids by paying off their student debt, or it can be investing in your house or investing in energy systems in your house. And as I point out, all of these things that I've mentioned so far are local investments with extraordinary high rates of return. So for my wife and I, for example, our best rate of return has been using retirement funds to put solar on our roof. And I mean, given the way that rates have increased with Southern California Edison, it has been a terrific payoff. And then there's a bunch of other things: businesses, nonprofits, community funds, municipal bonds, banks, and I'm going to mention these in a second. One thing that I have come to realize, however, is that you can change the law and it changes the behavior of a small number of people. That's good, but it doesn't bring about the level of systemic change that we're looking for. And this is why it's really important to think seriously about local investment as a mass mobilization. And I wanted to talk about 12 things that I have seen in the field working for promoting local investment. And just one thing that I will point out, which I'll return to at the end, which is none of these things really require the Economic Development Agency. If you don't trust your Economic Development Agency, you should just do this yourself. And there's lots of ways of organizing it. Be nice if the Economic Development Agency would take these steps seriously, but they might not. So the first one is educating people about local investment. So I have a newsletter that I've been producing for about 2 years every other week called the Main Street Journal. It goes to 8,000 people. And in our homepage, I have made 50 videos to give people a sense about all the questions and answers about local investment. And it's really all about informing investors, informing businesses what their options are. Number 2, unleashing Lions. So Lions stands for the Local Investment Opportunity Network of Port Townsend, Washington. The guy on the right is named James Fraser. He helped set up Lion, and it basically is a potluck supper where local businesses and local investors come together. Now, Port Townsend is a 10,000 person town and pretty small, but just this one social invention in a small town has led to almost $1 million of new local investment every year since 2007. So if I was a city or a county thinking about how to promote economic development, I would think about how I could set up Lions on every block. Washington State has actually begun to do this. Washington State Department of Commerce actually is spreading the Lion design, which they call LINs, Local Investment Networks, in a dozen rural communities in Washington State. Number 3, publishing a list. You've got to make it easy for people to find local investments of interest. And so about 4 years ago, a colleague and I started a website called the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange. At the time, we had virtually no money. Her high school, I believe he was a sophomore at the time, took a weekend to design a site. So the site doesn't look so professional, but just this like pretty quickly designed site was capable of beginning to interest lots of people in Baltimore in local investment. And during a couple of years of COVID, some fun facts about the exchange: that 72 businesses which we listed in Baltimore basically were able to raise about $4 million from almost 10,000 investors, and 90% of them or BIPOC businesses. So in my mind, every county, every jurisdiction with an economic development program should have a website where it lists local businesses that are looking for capital. Number 4, it's not enough to list them on the web because it takes some work for people to go on the website and find it. So what I've started to do is within the Main Street Journal is every other week, we put in people's inbox, that is the 8,000 readers, we put in their inbox the 30 or 40 newest local investment offerings so that people constantly have this new supply of investments out there. And if you go to our website, you can find a comprehensive listing of this. And there's several websites now that are listing these opportunities out there. Number 5, organizing investment advisors. In my mind, one of the obstacles to local investment is investment advisors, because most of them know nothing about this subject. If you were to ask, if you have an investment advisor and you were to say to them, well, my local co-op, grocery co-op, is building another branch. They are looking for people to lend them money. Should I do it? And your investment advisor would, I guarantee you, say, don't invest in this local business because most local businesses fail. Now, your investment advisor actually made an empirical error, because my hypothetical was not about any old local business. It wasn't about a startup, which does have a high failure rate. It was about an existing local business, a successful grocery co-op that's setting up another branch. So it's all about educating investment advisors. So this woman here, Angela Barbash, runs a very good investment advisory firm in Ypsilanti, Michigan called Revalue. And she has been educating investment advisors around her, and they meet as a core team. And core teams like this need to be put together in every community. Number 6, promoting pre-selling. The reason why pre-selling is so important is that pre-selling is a way of testing whether or not your business could be successful at raising capital through local investment. And unlike most local investment offerings, pre-selling is entirely legal and is not regarded as a security. So let me give you an example of what pre-selling was. This is when I was living in Maryland, and Neil will recognize this picture. This is my favorite entrepreneur in the DMV area, Andy Shalal, who runs Busboys and Poets. And when COVID hit, my wife and I thought, okay, we gotta come out and support a couple of local businesses. And I went to Andy and I said, and I handed him a $1,000 check. And I said, Andy, I know this is a very rough time for your business. I'm going to give you this check now and use it for whatever, and just give me $1,000 in gift cards and we'll consider it a done deal. And he was so pleased with this idea that he gave me $1,200 of gift cards. So I got a 20% rate of return on my investment with Andy. But significantly, the law does not regard this as a security, okay? The law regards this as a bulk pre-purchase of meals from Busboys and Poets. And you can find this same concept in other websites out there, like Credibles, which focuses on food businesses. But what's kind of cool about this is it enables us to get businesses to sort of test the waters and see what their fan base, what their customer base really thinks about the business. And if they succeed with that, they can graduate to a more ambitious capital raise. Number 7, facilitating self-direction. So this is really what I've written my most recent book about, Put Your Money Where Your Life Is. And the book talks about how if you're an American, you can create a self-directed IRA or a solo 401k and move your tax-deferred money into these accounts, and then you've got some ability to use that money for things like putting solar on your roof. But I also have this little slide to part of image to the right, which is showing how Australians have the same thing. They have what are called self-managed superannuation funds. And it turns out that about half of the money in the Australian pension system is self-directed like this. It's not given a lot of local content, but it could. Okay, number 8. Spreading new ownership models. So most of you will recognize the picture on the right is of a cheesehead. A cheesehead is a rabid fan of the Green Bay Packers. They are an important model out there because they are the only team in the football leagues that's not owned by a single obnoxious individual. The Green Bay Packers is owned by the city of Green Bay, and that has given it some very community-friendly behavior patterns. But honestly, there's a lot of different models for local ownership out there: social enterprise nonprofits, co-ops, worker-producer, consumer co-ops, land trusts out there. And what we sometimes don't remember is that local investment requires local ownership. And you can't have local ownership without local investment. So this is a critical part of the story, and making it easier to spread these models in your community is part of creating a healthy local investment ecosystem. Number 9, creating funds. So this is a handbook that I co-wrote a couple of years ago called Community Investment Funds, a how-to guide for building local wealth, equity, and justice. It's available for free on the web with the National Coalition for Community Capital. We have a dozen case studies in there of local investment funds, and we basically identified a number of strategies for communities to build these funds. Funds are important because it turns out that local investment requires a lot of time and a lot of work. And only a few of us really are capable of putting in that kind of time and work. And that's why in the conventional investment world, most of us put our money into funds where we have some fund manager who we trust will do good selection for companies or other securities in the fund. We'll manage those securities. We'll create some diversification. So if one company does bad and the others do good, we still get some rate of return. Also to create some liquidity so that we are able to pull our money in and out of the fund as needed. And my colleagues at the National Coalition for Community Capital have identified an interesting new fund design, which they call a diversified community investment fund. It's basically a real estate company. And by being a real estate company, you tiptoe around a lot of the requirements of the U.S. Investment Company Act. And so NC3 is now testing out these diversified community investment funds in 3 different communities, including most prominently Cincinnati. And if you want to really think about where things could be heading, I love this model in Nova Scotia in Canada. In 1998, Nova Scotia decided to give permission to local communities to create their own community pension funds. 70 communities have done so. This woman, who used to be an epidemiologist in her regular working life, started a fund called FarmWorks, which supports local food businesses and small farms in Nova Scotia. And I want to point out something here. One of the ways that Nova Scotia got this work started is they awarded a tax credit to Canadians, that is Nova Scotia residents, who put money in these funds. So yeah, the government put some money up front into them. So about 2 years ago, Nova Scotia did a retrospective study and said, okay, let's look at all the money that people have claimed in tax credits, and let's look at how many jobs these investments have created. And the cost was not $1 million per job, like we were talking about at the beginning. The cost was $500 per job. So it's a very cost-effective form of economic development. Number 10, issuing bonds. Some of you may remember this guy, Bernie Sanders. This is a picture of the young, vital Bernie Sanders when he was mayor of Burlington, Vermont. And one of the clever things that he did while he was mayor is he did a municipal bond issue. I think it was for about $100,000, and put that money into what ultimately became known as the Champlain Community Land Trust. So $100,000, fast forward 40 plus years, has grown into $100 million. $100 million of real estate in a land trust that supports 2,000 people. That to me is an amazing way that city and state governments can do problem solving, starting with municipal bonds. Another example comes from the state of Connecticut. State of Connecticut a couple of years ago started issuing green Liberty bonds. Now, Connecticut has one of maybe 50 or so green banks in the country. Some of them are at the state level, some are at a county level. The thing about these green banks is most of them are just operating off of public money, or sometimes banks contribute a little bit of money. The Green Bank in Montgomery County, Maryland, it falls into this category. But Connecticut Green Bank said, hey, why don't we figure out a way of growing the pot of money to accomplish what we want through these small denomination bonds? So their first issue, and again, we're going back about 2-ish years, their first issue was $25 million of low denomination bonds to support solar energy on affordable housing. It sold out in 48 hours. There was such high demand for this. And there is, since then, they have done a lot of other issues of securities to try to raise capital. And it just, again, it shows that a creative state agency can be engaged in raising capital for things that matter. Number 11, a tax credit. So I go back to Canada again, and in I guess about 7-8 years ago, the Canadian province of New Brunswick enacted a 50% provincial tax credit. They basically said, if you put money into a local business, a qualified local business, we will give you 50 cents off of your taxes, your provincial taxes, for every dollar you invest. Now, this was a hell of an incentive to get people to think about local investment carefully. So this picture here is of a Republican lawmaker in Michigan who introduced a pretty similar piece of legislation about 2 years ago in Michigan. As you know, the Republicans lost big time in the last election in Michigan. So the bill has since been reintroduced with almost no changes by the Democrats. And so this is soon going to be law. And as far as I'm concerned, this can be spread across the country and will enjoy all kinds of bipartisan support. Number 12, local banking. So one thing that Neil's former organization, Institute for Local Self-Reliance, did some nice reports basically showing that when you put $1 on deposit in a local bank, the probability of that dollar being reinvested in the community in local business is 3 times greater than it would be if that dollar was put on deposit in Bank of America. That's why small banks and credit unions are so important. And I think a reasonable ask for a local government is to move its banking services into a local bank or credit union. And many local governments will say, well, these entities are not big enough to support this kind of stuff. And it's an absolute falsehood. And if you want to see an example of 2 bigger jurisdictions that have done this with local banks and credit unions, look at Phoenix and Tucson. So just to summarize briefly what I've just shared with you with these 12 steps, almost all of these steps are bipartisan. These are, there's very little controversial in what I've said. And I will also point out that Kenneth Boulding, my favorite late economist, used to say anything that exists is possible, right? So everything that I showed you exists somewhere. It's just not being done in one place. And that's really where the power of this is. If you start putting all of these ideas in one place as an alternative way of doing economic development, it can be an extraordinary difference. And almost all the things that I shared with you are cheap. They are cost effective. They are way, way cheaper, like 1,000th the cost of typical corporate attraction strategies. And finally, what I would say about everything that I shared with you is that there is not a single economic development agency in the country that's giving them any weight. So get started anywhere with any of these things, and it could make a huge difference. This is my final slide, which is just a reminder that when you're talking about economic development with various state or county or local agencies, and they say to you, well,
Is he going to bed?
we believe all kinds of jobs, right? We believe in big business, small business, prison and free. Can you mute yourself again, Judy?
I thought immediately about it when I asked for it. Oh, no,
Judy, can you mute yourself?
We can hear you. You got to mute yourself.
I do?
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought you already had muted me.
Yeah. So apparently he's an ineffectual son at muting you. So all right. So at any rate, the point I want to make here is that the Economic Development Agency will try to claim that they can do everything. Support big business, little business, local, non-local, prison and free. And the truth is that economic development has limited resources. And every dollar that they spend for a corporate attraction is a dollar that's unavailable for local economic development and the kinds of innovations that I'm talking about here. And that's why I think focusing appropriately is so important. let me stop there and we can open it up to some discussion and let people think of these things.
Thank
Well,
you so much, Michael. My mind is blown as always. Go ahead, Neil. Mom, Doreen.
Well, Michael, of course, that was terrific. And I believe this is the first time I've seen a real formal presentation from you. Of course, we've had conversations and meetings and stuff. So, as I said in the chat, you not only laid out what's going on, but you showed us resources on how to work in our own community. So, really, hats off to you. I do have two technical questions. Maybe other people will will excuse us, but the first is in the limited experience I've had with financing projects, the concept of pooled bonds, POOLED bonds, meaning you have 5 or 6 companies, they need a total of 10 million. The government issues a bond and takes care of the. Is that similar to your number 7?
Yeah, I think it could be. And so I know in the cases you're working with, I mean, these are maybe companies that are in waste circular economy building, right?
Absolutely. Recycling, composting, reuse, exactly.
And I think, and it really is the same thing. At the end of the day, though, that a fund is going to require management, and so it's like, are you raising for just these 5 companies, or are you raising in a fund where the money is going to recycle and you have someone managing each round as it comes in and out? And
Very
I can see
helpful.
the argument both ways.
That's extremely helpful. And my last is not a question or anything. I just wanted to give an experience to underscore what you said about cities being able to put their money, which is considerable. Cities have tremendous cash flow in local banks. I had the privilege of working with a great mayor of Reading, Pennsylvania. He was so great that he only had 1 term. I won't go into details, but one of the first things he tried to do was exactly that. Reading is not a rich city, but whatever they had, he wanted to put in local banks. And the banks and the traditional politicians were yelling and screaming, and it was identified as a radical thing to do, which it is, and which is why he was trying to do it. He was trying to help his city. So I just wanted to tell that anecdote.
Yeah, and I look, and I feel like there have been a lot of local officials who have wanted to do things like this, and they either don't quite have the models, or they don't have the technical support to go along with it. Or, I mean, I feel like, again, I come back to my point on the 12 steps, that at the end of the day, we just need to do a lot of education of people about these alternatives, because when you talk investment, all they can think about is, my mutual fund, which is thoroughly invested in value or growth stocks on Wall Street. Yeah.
Well, one other thing about the situation in Reading, our job was to retake the privatized recycling system, which we did with union labor, and of course that's exactly what the mayor wanted, to create these great jobs. And one option that we explored, if we had more time, it could have been developed, and that is that the unions were incredibly helpful, both Laborers International, I forget the steel workers, but unions also can be sources of funds for specific projects. Obviously, the project would have to use union labor, which is a good thing anyway.
Right. Yeah, that's a great example. So one other thing I wanted to mention to you, Neil, I think from since we last spoke, which was a few months ago, I did 2-week speaking tour of Australia, and
Oh my gosh.
the anchor was the South Australian government, and they've got an agency called Green Industry South Australia. So GISA. And the reason why they wanted me is they were trying to figure out how can we get more capital into the circularity economy
Mhm.
businesses. So it's like right in the sweet spot of what you're trying to do.
Well, you know, the Australians have had a tremendous impact on recycling and economic developments here in the U.S. It was in 1818, I'm not that old, 1995, when they introduced the concept of zero waste as a meaningful, practical, aspirational goal, but with practical steps to get there. And it emerged out of all the discussions of in the capital of Canberra. But my point is that the nexus of local capital with local materials in the waste stream that could be separated and recovered is a natural. And speaking of payback, one other, not payback, but rate of return for your investment. And you had some great examples. I love the one about putting solar on your house with your retirement funds. And then you could put your savings back into your retirement funds.
That's what we do is we pay ourselves back.
Brilliant.
So we just did a loan from the solo 401k, and we pay ourselves back with what would have been our utility bill.
Well, you and I will talk, of course. We've got pending projects, but the concept of local financing using your local waste stream is just it, as they would say in the Soviet Union, it's the foundation of the bedrock, or is it the bedrock of the foundation? I don't know. I forget my Khrushchev speeches, but in any case, it's a natural link.
Yeah, and it's so another interesting factoid from the South Australia experience. You know, they've had a fee system for people putting, you know, when people bring their waste to whatever the dumps are, they have to pay a certain tipping fee to the government. That number has gotten so large that Green Industry South Australia, which is by legislation where half of that money goes to, but for Green Industry South Australia, the entire state would be in deficit. And that money flow has pulled the state into surplus.
It's a remarkable story. I assume you or someone has written up, but it sounds like it should be a video to interview people who walk people through that process. Great anecdote, great example. And in fact, I know you mentioned earlier that you made videos, which is terrific, and I'm going to start taking a look at them. I didn't know that.
Excellent. Yeah, I didn't do one on the South Australia one yet. Although,
okay,
I'd love to you know, there were a couple of great people there that I should interview.
Oh, I'm sure. And in fact, Dan Knapp, who was the person who brought back the information from Urban Ore, is a very big proponent of zero waste. I'll tell you what, let's do a garbage and local investment webinar together. How
about we title it "Local Investment is Garbage"?
I love it. And we'll hire Joel to be the promotional person because he's the most aggressive promotional person
Yes.
in the green world that I know about.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm living here in Portland, Oregon, but I'm good in Dutchess County. I did not. I tried as hard as I could for tonight. We got 40, 50 people to come out to hear Neil and a whole bunch of co-sponsoring organizations. I can try my talents elsewhere, but no results guaranteed. But thank you for the flattery.
Joel, I remind you that you're recording this, and and many of the people in the Dutchess network, and for that matter, the Westchester network, anti-incineration networks, they'll be able to benefit from Michael's presentation.
We're gonna get the video around. A couple things. I think, Michael, you explained this. I should know it. I'm feeling a little bit dull-headed. Circular economy. Oh, circular networks. Oh, Doreen has to go. She says, I would make the point that until we have a different set of county legislators, nothing will happen here. They continue to insist that without these incentives, the companies would not locate here. Like Frito-Lay, Amazon, The Gap. You know, Sue Serino, who's running for a county executive, she was a Republican state senator. She was a Republican county legislator. She was a Republican town board member in Hyde Park. She's unfortunately favored to be the new county executive. She actually took, I think, $1,000 in donations from One Dutchess, which is luxury housing development, waterfront development in Poughkeepsie. Well, One Dutchess got tens of millions of dollars from, I forget, it was the Dutchess County IDA, Industrial Development Agency, or Dutchess County Local Development Corporation. This is Sue Serino, who's telling reporters that, oh, the fact that I'm in the real estate industry and I'm taking money from real estate developers, that means I can advocate for people, like, you know, get the waterfront Poughkeepsie paved over for luxury development. But what is the circular? And there goes Mount Vesuvius, known as our 4-year-old. What is the circular economy? And I'm going to cut my mic.
Okay, Neil, it would be immoral for me to answer this when you're on the call. So you do this one.
I'm going to answer it by telling you a story that I heard years and years ago, which defined cooperation, sustainability, and zero waste circularity. But after I tell you this anecdote, I want to make a comment about the term circularity. But the anecdote is that Thomas Edison and Henry Ford lived close together in New Jersey when they were both national and world renowned. And one day, the story goes, Ford walked over to Edison, who was on his porch, and he went to open the gate, the leading to the walkway to the porch, and he couldn't just throw it open. He had to lean into it and use his muscles to get that door open, fence open. And he walked up to the porch and said to Edison, "You're such a great inventor and genius, and yet you can't have your fence gate working properly." And Edison said, "It is working properly because when people visit me, I like them to do some work for me. And that gate is attached to a pump that pumps the water up to the roof of my toilet." So that is the definition that I think we should all aspire to in terms of circularity. It includes barter and all kinds of good human activities. But on circularity, I'm not advocating this, but I have heard a couple of discussions. I've sat in and I was very quiet, in which people were basically dissing the term circularity because it wasn't specific enough. It allowed for a lot of things that might not be circular, such as it came up in the garbage conversation, of course. The fact that Coke and Pepsi and everybody now are pledging, and probably we'll get to it in a few years, of having their bottles and cans 100% made, 100% made from recycled materials. And everyone is applauding that as circularity. But in fact, circularity is refillable glass bottles. That's the zero waste alternative. So the circularity may be a term that we have to define when we use. In any case, it makes for an interesting discussion on a cold winter night.
Amen. And I'm reminded of the Distorting Subsidies Limitation Act. Have you guys heard of this? And there goes our daughter. Well, there's got to be one county, Michael, there's got to be one county, one state that's doing something halfway innovative.
With respect to the subsidies, it may exist, and I've seen, so there's a couple of blogs out there that I follow, and occasionally, you know, they'll talk about how there are checks and balances put on public money. And, like you'll claw back money if certain goals are not achieved. That's helpful, but, it's still like, it's still scratching the surface on the old paradigm. What I would like to see, so I'll tell you what I'd like to see, and I haven't seen anyone do this yet, and that is the same thing we do in procurement and contracts, and that is you have an auction, you have an open bidding process, and if the government says, well, we've got $10 million that we want to put in jobs, well, you invite every company inside and outside the county to say, okay, how many jobs are you going to bring us? And you could require that they're well-paying jobs or union jobs, whatever you want to put on it. How many jobs are you going to provide us at what number? And you start with the cheapest offers, and at some point you exhaust the $10 million. And that way we at least have a rational economic process for distributing the money, and it's open to all kinds of companies. And the fact that that's not even on the table,
Yeah.
that it just, if people say you can't do that, we have to have these secret meetings. It just underscores how unholy this enterprise is.
Amen. Well spoken.
One of the things that we observed. Never mind. It's too long an issue. I sense we're winding down. Go ahead, Joe.
No, you can't do that, Neil. I got to hear it. Sorry, I got to hear it.
Let me gather my thoughts. I had too many thoughts running through my head at the same time.
All right. Well, yeah. I will just point out while you're gathering your thoughts, Neil, that Joel, you have, even though you sit in Portland and you have been aggressively attacking Dutchess County and New York's economic development, but honestly, it's no better in Portland or Oregon. And there's like a green lipstick that has been put on this attraction pig in Oregon's economic development strategy, but it's no different. And honestly, I think if you assess how Oregon has done economically over the last 25 years, I think one explanation for rising inequality and poverty in Oregon used to be much stronger economically relative to other states, is how much money has been thrown away in these stupid corporate attractions.
The term I was struggling for, Joel and everyone, was opportunity costs. The fact, as Michael laid out, spending money the wrong way hurts you twice because it keeps you from spending money the right way. Obviously, there's a limited amount of money in government. It's critical, but unfortunately, governments and politicians are not thinking that way, and we have to organize locally. And of course, Joel, we all know that.
Amen. I have a really nice teaching job now, so I'm mild-mannered Clark Kent here. Turn into super pain in the neck.
Well, that leads me to a question. Are you involved politically where you're living?
Not at all. Actually, I did door to door for Jamie McLeod Skinner, who ran a great campaign against Lori Chavez. I don't know, the Tea Party MAGA Republican. But I haven't, and I've met a couple candidates and helped out locally. But I have a nice teaching job. I'm just a normal guy.
Good for you.
Quiet person. But when I get online and it's time to get involved with Dutchess County, but
I understand. Now I'm loyal to both Brooklyn and Washington, D.C.
Now
Even though
and you're loyal to New Jersey too.
I was just going to say, and now I've added Montclair.
Yeah, we can wrap up pretty soon. Just I'm reminded of, I don't know where, I think it was Frank Morrow, who used to be the executive director of the Fiscal Policy Institute. I think he might have told a decade or two ago about the Distorting Subsidies Limitation Act of 1999 and the race to the bottom. And I tried to do some Googling, and I used to be able to Google. There was Dennis Kucinich, Bernie Sanders, David Mingay, who I'm not even sure is in the House of Representatives for Michigan anymore, and one other. 4 members of the House were sponsoring this legislation. It was a 100% federal tax on any economic incentive that a state wanted to give to a corporation to go from one state to another, like Mercedes-Benz to Alabama, Arkansas, whatever, because it's been going on for a long time.
Mhm.
And of course, I know we're all shocked that that legislation never passed, and like it only maybe had 4 co-sponsors, and now you can barely Google it. I think I found another link. I forget. I included
What
it.
was it called again?
The Distorting Subsidies Limitation Act of 1999.
Huh.
And
Okay.
I found. I was doing some looking around this morning, and I think I found. I found Mercatus.org. Michael, I don't know if you've heard of them. MERCATUS. They talk about the Interstate Compact and Economic Development Subsidy Arms Race. That, and of course, are there any state legislators proposing that?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, Greg Leroy has been on this case forever and does publish, interesting policies that move a little bit in the right direction. But I haven't seen like a wholesale reinvention of this. And I feel like, this subsidy thing requires a major rethink.
As I'm thinking, listening and thinking, I work with an array of maybe 8 or 9 reuse companies that repair appliances, computers, textiles, and then sell them. All, not all nonprofit, but all community-based, for-profit community-based as well as nonprofit community-based. And this conversation is going to lead me to make some very specific suggestions in Detroit and Minneapolis, where, among other places where I'm working. So, Michael, I will get in touch and meet you in Brooklyn, even though you're not going to be in my old neighborhood, but I'll venture out of my old neighborhood to meet you for.
I like to venture out of Dumbo and
Okay,
find a good deli there.
Oh, well, I don't know where all the good delis are. I haven't lived in Brooklyn for 55 years, but we'll have some good food and catch up.
Great. Well, nice seeing you, Neil.
Yes,
nice seeing you, Joel and Judy, and let's do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, Joel and Judy, thank you so much for coordinating this.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. All right,
Have fun in the desert.
Okay.
we're gonna
Bye-bye.
mogul investments, our local media. All right.
Yes.
All right.
Cheers.